Missouri, the WPA Guide to the Show Me State, Part 2. The town began to assume its contemporary character shortly before the Civil War, when railroads from the east stopped short at the Mississippi River. Hannibal's position on the western shore suggested it as a logical terminus for a railroad to the west. In 1856, the first train of the Hannibal and St. Joseph Railroad was run westward as far as Palmyra, the county seat. 3 years later, the road was completed across the state to St. Joseph. Shops for the road were established in Hannibal, and in them, in 1862, was built the world's first railroad mail car. Here, too, was constructed the General Grant, the first locomotive built west of the Mississippi, which made its initial run in March 1865. During the Civil War, commerce almost passed from the river, but the new railroads already had assumed a large place in Hannibal's economic pattern. In 1871, the Hannibal, now Wabash, Bridge was completed. Of draw-span design, it was the second bridge across the Mississippi to touch Missouri shores. In 1886, the town built the state's first city-owned light and power plant, and in 1889 it established the first tax-supported library in Missouri. When the lumber boom collapsed and the flour mills moved away, new and heavier railroad industries moved in, and the shoe factory was established. 3 miles south of town, the shale and limestone bluffs attracted one of the largest cement manufacturing plants in the nation. Hannibal Lagrange College, a Baptist coeducational institution, moved to Hannibal from Lagrange, Missouri in 1929. In 1935, the $1 million Mark Twain Bridge across the Mississippi River was completed. Points of interest: the Mark Twain Museum and Home, open 8 to 6 daily, 206 to 280 Hill Street, adjoining buildings, contain Mark Twain memorabilia and antiques of the Hannibal vicinity. The museum, dedicated in 1935, is a 2-story stone structure designed in the manner of the old building which formerly stood on the site. The collection housed here contains an impressive number of objects associated with Mark Twain. Of outstanding interest is a group of photographs made of the author near the close of his life. Entrance to the home is made from the museum through a covered passageway. The 2-story white frame house, built flush with the sidewalk, is representative of unpretentious Missouri houses of the pre-Civil War period. The rooms are small, the ceiling is low, the box stair ladder-like. Ornament of any sort is lacking. It was a house built with slender means to fill a family's need. The house and the lot on which it stands are intimately associated with the Clemens family. Shortly after moving to Hannibal in 1839, Mark Twain's father, John Marshall Clemens, bought for $7,000 the entire quarter block extending east from the alley to Main Street. Like most of his other financial ventures, the speculation proved disastrous, where he was unable to meet the payments and creditors took over the property in 1843. It appears that one small lot in the section was saved by a St. Louis cousin, James Clemens, Jr., and on this, John Clemens built the 3 lower rooms of the present house in 1844. In these, the family lived until 1846, when John was forced to pay a note which he had unwisely endorsed. For a friend to do this, he had to sell most of the family furniture. The cousin offered to let him remain on the property for a rental of $25 a year, but with little left save a piano, this was impractical. A doctor and Mrs. Grant, who at that time lived across the street on the second floor of the Pilaster House, took the family in under an arrangement whereby the Clemenses cared for the house and prepared meals. The Clemenses lived with the Grants until 1847, when they returned to their own house. In 1850, Orion, the eldest son, began an ill-starred venture as an editor. When a fire destroyed much of his equipment, he moved his plant to the parlor of the house, and there he published the Hannibal Journey from about 1851 until he was forced to sell it 2 years later. It was in this diminutive parlor, therefore, that Sam, as his brother's assistant editor, began his career as an author. See newspapers and radio. Orion added the second-floor rooms to the house to give additional space. It was about the time that the Clemenses first moved into their own house, 1844, that the Tom Sawyer days, that is to say, the boyhood of Samuel Clemens, may be said to have begun. Most of the home incidents of the book actually happened. Sam Clemens did throw clods at his brother Henry, the prototype of Sid, for getting him into trouble about the colored thread with which he sewed his shirt when he came home from swimming. He did give painkiller to Peter the cat. At the parlor door, he saw his mother stand up to the town bully who was pursuing his daughter with a rope with the intention of wearing it out on her. Jane Clemens admitted the fleeing daughter and then barred the door with her arms until the enraged father stopped swearing and threatening and slunk off. The house was purchased and presented to the city by Mr. and Mrs. George A. Mahan in 1912. In 1937 to 38, it was carefully restored and furnished with such objects and furniture as a Midwestern home in the days of Mark Twain's boyhood might have contained. Some of the furnishings were taken from the home of Becky Thatcher and other early Hannibal families. Aunt Polly's room, the front upstairs bedroom, reflects the prim tastes of its might-have-been occupant. Her dresses are hanging in the closet. Her nightgown, long and full, lies across the foot of the bed. Tom's room has sturdy, durable furniture, and on the bedside table is his loot from the whitewashing episode, the brass doorknob, the marble, and the other trophies. The Becky Thatcher house, open daily, 211 Hill Street, is a 2.5-story gray frame structure in which the Hawkins family lived during a portion of Sam Clemens' childhood. Sam first knew Laura Hawkins, Becky Thatcher, when her family lived in the Pilaster House. The two children vowed never to love anyone else and always to walk to and from school together. When Sam once accidentally dropped a brick on Laura's finger, it was he who cried loudest and longest. The Pilaster House, private, southwest corner of Hill and Main Streets, named for the Greek revival pilasters which ornament its exterior, is a 2.5-story yellow frame house of considerable architectural interest. Tradition has it that the house was ordered for erection in Marion City, but that because of a flood it was delivered at Hannibal, and so was set up there. The building is closely associated with the Clemens family. On the first floor was McDaniel's store, where Mark Twain later said he bought candy for more than 60 years. Rooms on the second floor were occupied by the Hawkins family during the early 1840s, and after that by Dr. and Mrs. Grant. The Clemens family lived with the Grants in this house from about 1846 to 1847. It was here that John Clemens held the meeting which brought about the building of the Hannibal and St. Joseph Railroad, and here he died, March 24, 1847. The site of Huck Finn's home, 213 North Street, marked by an iron tablet, is occupied by a modern 2-story frame dwelling private. Here in a disreputable old house lived Tom Blankenship, Huck Finn's prototype, a scant block down the alley, but socially in the wrong direction from the Clemens home. Sam adopted the Blankenships outright, and he was likely to be there at any hour of the day. At night, summoned by a system of catcall signals, Sam would slide down the roof at the back of the Clemens house and, by means of a convenient arbor and flight of steps, joined Tom and the gang. The shed at the rear of the present house is said to date from the period of the Blankenship residence. The Joseph P. Ament Printing Office, private, 315 North Main Street, is a 3-story brick building in the style of the commercial architecture of the 1840s. Its wooden cornice has recently been removed. A room on the second floor over the Brittenham drugstore once housed the Missouri Courier, edited by Joseph P. Ament. See newspapers and radio. In the fall of 1848, a little over a year after his father's death, 13-year-old Sam Clemens began a 2-year apprenticeship there. The Clemens family fortunes were at low ebb, and Sam helped out as best he could, wearing immense, much too large cast-off clothing and sleeping with the other apprentice and the journeyman printer on a pallet on the office floor. It was on his way home from this office one afternoon that Sam saw flying along the pavement a square of paper, a leaf from a history of Joan of Arc, which changed his outlook on life and gave him the urge to write. The Judge John Marshall Clemens Law Office, private, 112 Bird Street, is in a 2-story gray frame building now in bad repair, set flush with the sidewalk. Extensive alterations during the past 50 years have left few of the original exterior features. The first floor is said to have been used for a time as a law office by Mark Twain's father, John M. Clemens. It was perhaps here that Sam Clemens, unwilling to go home one night because of some prank, came to spend the night. He describes in Innocents Abroad how, as he lay on the lounge, a square of moonlight from the window slowly approached a shape on the floor to reveal the dead face of a man named McFarlane, who had been stabbed in the Hudson-McFarlane feud and carried to the office pending the inquest. Sam suddenly decided to leave, taking the window sash with him because, as he explained, it seemed more convenient at the time to do so. Nearby is Wildcat Corner, the corner of Main and Bird Streets, where Sam and Tom Blankenship, the original Huck Finn, conducted a piece of high finance with a coonskin. Huck sold the skin in Sam's store for 10 cents. When the clerk threw it on a pile of furs in the back part of the store, Sam climbed through an open window and retrieved it for Huck to resell. This continued until the scheme was discovered. The Carol Beckwith House, private, except tea room, northwest corner 4th and Bird Streets, a 2-story yellow brick house with a comparatively recent frame addition at the rear, has been modernized until only a few traces of its age remain. Here was born Carol Beckwith, portrait painter, member of the National Academy of Art, and lifelong friend of Mark Twain. One of Beckwith's paintings hangs in the Garth Memorial Library, southeast corner 5th and Church Streets. The house was also one of the many Hannibal homes of the Hawkins family, whose daughter Laura was the prototype of Becky Thatcher. Central Park, bounded by 4th, 5th, Broadway, and Center Streets, is a square of Mark Twain's childhood. On or near the square was the school of Mr. Sam Cross, which Sam attended, and in which he purposely misspelled February in a spelling bee so that Becky might win. The square at that time was a hill covered by a jungle of plum and hazelnut trees and wild grapevines. At recess and noon hours, the children gathered flowers, climbed the trees, and swung in the grapevine swings. At the northeast corner of the park is Frederick Hibbard's William H. Hatch statue, commemorating the Hannibal attorney and congressman who fathered the federal law establishing agricultural experiment stations. His home near Hannibal was given to the state by his daughter, Sally Hatch, and is the site of the Hatch Dairy Experiment Station, operated by the University of Missouri. Hatch, 1833-96, was a native of Kentucky who came to Hannibal in the 1850s. He represented the 1st Missouri District in Congress from 1878 to 1895. The Robert E. Kuntz birthplace, northwest corner, 6th and Bird Street, is a 2-story yellow brick house surrounded by an ornamental lawn fence. Admiral Robert E. Kuntz was Chief of Naval Operations from 1919 to 1923. The Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn statue, Main and North Streets, is a bronze group by Frederick C. Hibbard, born at Canton, Missouri, that catches the careless dress and adventurous spirit of Mark Twain's 2 most famous characters. The statue was donated by Mr. and Mrs. George A. Mahan and their son. The Mark Twain Memorial Lighthouse, Main Street atop Cardiff Hill, rises 54 feet above its base and nearly 200 feet above the Mississippi River. The hilltop, easily accessible, affords an excellent view of the river and surrounding lands. The Cardiff Hill of the stories is in reality Holliday's Hill, named for Mrs. Holliday, who once lived at the top and burned a lamp in her window every night as a guide for the river pilots. It was down this hill that the boys rolled the stones which startled churchgoers, the final enormous rock which, by freak of fortune, hurdled a Negro and his wagon instead of crushing them.